This is not how I envisioned my life. I've been miserable for 18 years, and there doesn't seem to be any relief. I don't even know how it happened. One moment I was a single, happy guy, and before I knew it, I was married, and not so happy. Sherry couldn't be called a doll, but she was friendly and disposable. For a guy like me, that was very important. Being friendly and approachable meant that I could ask for a date and not get turned down. This developed into an ongoing relationship, and a year later, after I got a full-time job at the Atlas Pump Factory, we got married. Now, 18 years later, I'm still working at Atlas Pump Works and still married. The biggest difference is that I now have 2 children. I have always been malleable. I never wanted to be a boss or any kind of entrepreneur. I believed in the philosophy of go with life, whatever that is. Don't make waves and don't piss anyone off. It worked for me most of the time. What did I mean by most of the time? Well, it didn't work as far as my marriage was concerned. Sherry quickly realized that she could use my unusual personality quirks to her advantage. As a wife, I had few complaints about Sherry. She cooked well, kept the house clean, was usually available for sex for the first few years, and kept herself in good shape. On the other hand, she quickly became bossy when she realized she could get away with it and wasn't very frugal. I always wanted to buy us a house, but every time I had a few dollars, Sherry found something to spend it on. As a result, we still live in a rented house to this day. Our credit cards were always maxed out. Our home life has not been a solid rose. Our son Dwight was 16 years old and had been arrested twice for drug dealing. One more time and he wouldn't be released on probation. Our 17-year-old daughter Gemma was 100% goth. Her lifestyle was beyond me and fully supported by her mother. Family dinners didn't exist. I very rarely saw or interacted with my children. My wife made it clear that I was to mind my own business, and she would look after the children. As you can guess, my relationship with my wife was no better. A few years ago, she took a job at a local insurance agency. I don't know exactly what the job entailed, but she liked it, so of course I kept my mouth shut. She said it was her money and that she could spend it as she saw fit. That meant they didn't go for food, rent, utilities, or other household expenses. She spent it on clothes and visits to the beauty parlor. Over the years, her salary regularly increased, and with it, her closet. All the while, I was happily working at the Atlas Pump Factory. I had worked my way up in the company and was now the chief parts puller. We didn't mass-produce pumps. We made specialty pumps for specific purposes. My job was to make sure we had all the parts needed for each job. Not an overly impressive career goal, but I was happy and satisfied. The pay was good and I had family medical benefits. About 5 years ago, I suspected my wife was having an affair. It took a long time to verify because she didn't see fit to try to hide it. I accepted all the usual lame excuses for her adventures and never questioned her about anything. Why bother? Our sex life gradually dwindled until it came to naught. She never complained. I realized why she was getting such good raises at work. Since her affair was with her boss, Malcolm Hurd, I started saving money on the side. I also got a new hobby, wood carving. I knew nothing about wood carving, but I had a penknife. I quickly learned that serious woodcarvers don't usually use a penknife, although they like to portray it in movies and TV shows. After a while, I had several good knives and other tools. I started carving small animal figures and moved on to more complex things. I found the quiet time alone in the basement relaxing and enjoyable. I realized that I wasn't really a wood carver, but a whitewasher. I don't know what the difference is, but whitewasher sounds more appropriate. And then I discovered poplar bark. My carving endeavors took on a new meaning. The only problem was the availability of good bark. I finally found a source of bark in Montana. Most of the poplar bark products fell into the category of fancy houses or tree spirits. I decided to focus on learning how to make houses. As my fascination with bark carving grew, my relationship with my family slowly deteriorated. My future was bleak, and I had no incentive or motivation to change it. I figured I would die a lonely old man sitting in my basement doing wood carving. I didn't care anymore. And then I got a phone call. Hello? Curtis? Curtis Langford? Yes. This is Marcia Hurd. Your wife works alongside my husband at Eagle Home Insurance. I believe we met a few years ago at one of the company meetings. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hurd. I don't remember meeting you. I don't often go to company events. I don't usually get invited. Anyway, the company is having an awards ceremony this Friday, and you should come to it. I think you'll find it interesting. Nothing formal, a suit and tie will do just fine. I don't know, Mrs. Hurd. My wife usually isn't too willing to let me go to events like this with her. I think she's afraid I'll embarrass her or something. I don't think I can make it, but thanks for the invitation. It's not just an invitation, Mr. Langford. I really think it would be in your best interest to attend the event. I've already made reservations for you and your wife. They serve first-class meat. We'll see, but don't count on anything. I'm sure you will, Mr. Langford. I'll see you on Friday. It was a strange conversation with a man I had never met. I had no interest or desire to attend such a meeting. How Sherry would present it all when she got home. I wondered if I should even tell her about Mrs. Hurd's call. Maybe I should buy a new tie. I decided to go online and order a new box of tree bark. I had a lot of carving work ahead of me. It was almost 8 o'clock when my wife finally came home. I was fed up, as usual. Sorry I'm late, dear. We're working on a lot of claims because of the hurricane last month. Did you make anything to eat? Yes. Did you do it yourself? We had pizza delivered to the office. Mrs. Hurd called me today. There's a corporate event Friday night and she confirmed that we would be attending. I told her that you would probably be there, but not me. She insisted that we should both attend. I have no idea why, and I didn't feel like arguing with her. Try to get it settled by the end of the week. Why did Mrs. Hurd call you? I have no idea. I have not the slightest desire to attend any of your company's social events. You know that. Just deal with it. It must be important if she took the time to call you. Maybe you should just go for a change. It might be easier than aggravating her. Surely you know she's the actual owner of the company, not Malcolm. No, I didn't know that. I really don't care. Why do you persist in saying that? Why? Do you really want to know? It's embarrassing and humiliating for me to be around all your coworkers because they know what our relationship is like. I don't understand why you won't do everything in your power to prevent me from going. Obviously, it doesn't bother you. What the hell are you talking about? Everything you're saying is gibberish. Everyone in your company knows about your relationship with Malcolm Hurd. Whenever they see me, they always smirk, giggle, or make snide remarks. I can deal with it by avoiding them. So I just stay away from them. Curtis, you're out of your mind. I don't know where you get these weird ideas. You're going on Friday. That's the end of it. Buy a new tie. No, forget it. I'll buy you a new tie. Interestingly, she didn't deny or defend her relationship with Malcolm Hurd. She just let it all evaporate. If you don't discuss it, then it doesn't exist. That was the first time I said or hinted anything about her affair. She didn't react. For years, I tried not to rock the boat, and when I finally did, it turned out to be a non-event. It was like she didn't care if I knew or not. I decided I needed an exit strategy. No more going after her. I had 4 days to prepare. Prepare for what? I didn't know. 18 years of being the good guy. I'd wasted half my life. By Friday, I was ready. All options were considered and one was chosen. The hardest part was what to do with the kids. They were both mine, I assumed, but I had no parental bond with either of them. I tried, but to no avail. Sherry managed to turn them away from me, and I let it happen. As a result, they were both no longer my problem. All I was capable of doing was ensuring their existence. Sherry took a few minutes to make sure my tie was tied properly, and I swear I could see her smirking while she did it. During the ride, I was reminded not to make a scene or do anything to embarrass her. It was going to be a long night. But it never happened. There were only about 50 or 60 people there, and I didn't know any of them. Sherry quickly left me, and I headed over to the open bar and grabbed a bottle of whatever beer they had in stock. I hadn't even finished the first one before I noticed several young guys looking in my direction and smiling. When I looked away, I could make out the word creep and a few chuckles. Hi, my name is Gary Jones. You're Curtis, right? Sherry's husband? He held out his hand. I shook his hand and just nodded at him, silently confirming my identity. For a few seconds we stood in silence, neither of us knowing where to direct the conversation. So, Curtis, how long have you and Sherry had an open marriage? I've heard of such arrangements, but I've never met anyone who actually lived like that. He smiled and waited for an answer. He wasn't playing smart. This was a serious question for him. I noticed a small group of women nearby, looking in my direction and giggling. If I stayed here, it was going to be a long night. Not 10 minutes later, I walked through the door. I set my half-empty bottle on the bar, turned to my companion, and shook his hand again. "Nice to meet you, Gary Jones. Enjoy the rest of your evening." I turned and quietly walked out of the building. I spent the next hour loading up my 10-year-old Outback. I was glad I had spent so much time preparing. I was trying to figure out if I wanted to take George Foreman or not when my cell phone rang. Curtis, are you there? It's Marcia Hurd." "Yes, I'm here. What can I do for you, Mrs. Hurd?" "You've disappeared. I saw you and your wife go into the house and then you were gone. You missed an important part of the evening. I felt you should be here." "I don't understand. What exactly did I miss?" "At 8 o'clock this evening, my husband Malcolm was served with divorce papers, and your wife was served with a summons. Since I owned the company, they were fired as well. I wanted to do it in a way that would be as humiliating as possible. That's why I wanted you to be there, to embarrass your wife as much as possible." "Wow, I'm sorry I missed that. I applaud your creativity." I didn't know what else to say, and we sat in silence for a while. "Are you going to be all right, Mrs. Hurd?" "Yes, of course. Why do you ask?" "Just trying to be a little considerate." "Well, thanks for the call. I've got to go now. Good luck with the business. Goodbye." I hung up before she could continue the conversation. I had a long drive ahead of me. The evening worked out much better than I had anticipated. I took George Foreman with me. My brother Stan and his wife Barbara lived in Huntsville. Stan had his own business servicing garage doors and wicket gates at personal storage units. There were over 100 storage units in the county, which meant thousands of overhead gates that were in constant need of repair. There was more work than he could handle. Some of the larger storage facilities had their own maintenance staff, but for most it was more cost-effective to outsource the work. I moved in with my brother and immediately started my new job. After working with him for 3 weeks, I started going out to work on my own. It was a nice change of pace. I kept my old cell phone but took out the SIM card. Stan gave me a new phone for business. I also started looking for an apartment. Staying in the guest room wouldn't work for long. I had no contact with Sherry or anyone at home. No one knew where I was. I got my Alabama driver's license and tags for my Subaru. Life was good. Things were going great. I had a small apartment within walking distance of Stan and Barbara. One of the bedrooms was set up as a wood carving space. I bought a small air fryer to accompany my George Foreman. I didn't go full keto, but I started watching my carbs. In 6 months, I lost 30 extra pounds. I didn't miss my old life, but I felt like I never got closure. I expected someone to come looking for me, but that didn't happen. No one cared that I was gone. They may have missed my money, but I was sure they never missed me. I was never served with divorce papers or asked for alimony. I lost several nights of sleep worrying about it, but quickly got rid of it with the help of Little Black and Tan. Finally, one day, I decided it was time. "Hey, Curtis, is that you?" She sounded normal. "Yeah. I'm just calling to see if you filed for divorce yet." "Why? Are you thinking of getting married again?" "No, but I thought you might. I don't want to stand in your way." There was a brief pause. "Curtis, where are you? Do you think you'll ever come home again?" "I haven't thought about it. As far as I'm concerned, things are good the way they are. How are things with you?" "Not very well, I'm afraid. Fortunately, you called on Sunday. I'm usually at work most of the day. I work at the Waffle House every morning and clean the shelves at Kroger's in the evening. It's the only way I can pay rent, utilities, and car insurance." "Sorry to hear that. What happened at the Eagle House?" I didn't get an answer. I waited a few moments. "Can't the kids help you? They're old enough to find some work." Dwight got caught dealing again and is serving 2 years in a juvenile detention center in Graterford. Gemma's in California right now with a guy named Rocco. I never got his last name. There's not much help there. "Well, Sherry, I'm sorry things aren't working out for you. If you decide you want a divorce, just let me know." "How can I do that? I don't have an address and you keep your phone." I calmly pressed the end call button then. I blocked her number and turned off my phone. I'll have to buy a new phone, probably a smartphone. The turning point in my new life came the following month. The Von Braun Center in Huntsville was hosting an arts and crafts show. Stan and Barbara insisted I attend. One of Barbara's childhood friends was going to be in the exhibit, and she wanted me to meet her. It seemed like some kind of setup, and I resisted, but I wanted to see the exhibit. Susie Doyle had an exhibit of small, sawdust-fired ceramic figures. Each was 6 to 10 inches tall and had a unique black finish. The figurines were strange. They were animals, but not like any I had ever seen. Some of them appeared to be penguins, but they had heads like pelicans. I noticed a few small cat figures that had owl-like faces. They were unique, to say the least. I was introduced to them and had a lot of questions. I guess I should have been interested in Susie, but I blew it by showing more interest in her art. Why are they all black? Do you fire them yourself? Is that real sawdust or pellets like in smoking grills? Why are some pieces shiny and some dull? Susie seemed to think the questions were valid and took her time answering each one as I asked them. Stan and Barbara smiled, and I think Barbara giggled a little. They withdrew and continued their rounds of the exhibit. I stayed and talked to Susie. I spent more time in conversation with her than I had ever spent with women before. We didn't discuss anything personal, but I asked if I could come to her house. She was very receptive. 30 minutes later, Stan and Barbara returned. We went into the Outback to get some dinner. Curtis, do you realize that since we left the convention center, all you've talked about is Susie and her animals? Barbara sort of smiled as she said this. I paused. I guess I did, yeah. I used to like her. And I liked her funny animals, too. I felt comfortable with her. Stan leaned across the table and looked me in the eye. That's a good thing, Curtis. Don't pass her up. I was a little embarrassed, and Stan and Barbara picked up on that. They grinned when I told them I was going to visit her that weekend. Finding Boaz was easy with the GPS. Finding where Susie lived, on the other hand, was not so easy. It wasn't a farm or ranch, just a village. The house stood off the road about 100 yards away. There were several outbuildings adjoining it, more than one would have guessed. I can't say the house was neat, but it wasn't dirty either. You could tell it looked lively. It was also very private. I was greeted with hugs and barks from the dog, who quickly quieted down when he realized I wasn't a threat. The chickens didn't seem to care. We started the day with coffee and light conversation. She couldn't wait to show me her pottery studio. About 100 feet behind the house was a low hill, one side of which showed the area where she was digging out clay. There were several crudely made wire mesh racks that she used to sift the clay before bringing it into the house. It quickly became clear how she managed to maintain a trim figure. Pushing the wheelbarrow down the uneven path back to the workshop when it was full of clay was not easy. After a few hours, I was completely stunned. The only thing I didn't see was where the sawdust was coming from. She said it would come in the afternoon. The sawdust was used to fire ceramic figurines. She would load a 55-gallon barrel with sawdust and greenware figurines and then fire it up. Several days would pass before the smoldering fire reached the bottom of the barrel. By then, all the figurines were already burnt. The finer the sawdust, the slower the fire would burn. We ate a couple sandwiches for lunch and then sat on the porch. Between two heavy rockers, she set an ice chest and smiled. Apparently, she had called Stan and Barbara before I arrived. The refrigerator was full of black and tans. We never got to visit the sawdust mill, but we did kill quite a few long necks. Susie made us pasta for dinner, and I spent the rest of the evening drinking coffee. No, I didn't stay the night. But I did need a GPS to get home. I started spending a lot more time in Boaz, which seemed to please Stan and Barbara. While I was not at all interested in making ceramic figurines like Susie did, I was curious to see how she did it. Of course, the whole time I wasn't doing wood carving. I spent a few days improving the path from the clay pit to the workshop. I also managed to buy a two-wheeled heavy-duty cart to replace the wheelbarrow, which I thought was a bit flimsy. The main way of controlling the burning rate in her sawdust kilns was by adjusting the airflow. The type of sawdust available and its texture also affected the firing. I was able to adapt an old lawnmower to process the sawdust into smaller pieces, which resulted in slower burning. Susie was thrilled with my efforts. One thing led to another. and eventually I ended up staying the night in Boaz. Susie and I became much closer. By then, we were talking about personal things as well. I was careful to talk about my marital problem, trying hard not to be vindictive. It didn't bother her too much that I was married. Her situation was a little different. Susie had been married for 30 years. They had no children. Her husband Dave had just retired from TVA. Shortly after they moved in, he had a heart attack. At the time of the attack, he was in the backyard of the house. When she found him, he was already too weak to be saved. Their only income was a pension from TVA. If he died, the pension would stop. So she made sure he never died. She showed me his resting place, and I'm sure I noticed a small tear in her eye. Susie kept him alive for over 3 years. Joint federal income tax was a problem, but in the computer age, it was easily overcome. The pension check came every month, and everyone was happy. One of the nice things about living in Boaz was that no one bothered you. During the week, I lived in Huntsville and continued to work for Stan. On weekends, I was with Susie. She was as enamored with my bark carvings as I was with her pottery. I had a little nook in her store. Unfortunately, I didn't have much time for wood carving. The house she shared with Dave was in serious need of repair. Between helping her in her shop and fixing everything around it, there just wasn't much time. I got a call from my dad in Ocala yesterday. Stan caught me before starting his rounds on Monday. Is everything okay? Is Mom okay? Yes, they're doing fine. He called to let me know they got a letter from a lawyer in Pennsylvania about your divorce. Sherry didn't know where to send it, so she asked me to deliver it to them. I told him to forward it to me, and I'll make sure you get it. Damn! It's nice to get some good news for a change. What are you going to do? I guess I'll just sign it and send it back. It might be a good idea if I get someone to look at it first. What do you think? We have a lawyer who handles this business. I'll have him check it out. The divorce was pretty straightforward, so I just signed it and sent it back. She got everything that was in there, and I got everything I had. All that was left was to wait 90 days. Susie seemed happy to hear about it, but tried to keep her hands to herself. I was somewhat relieved. After about 3 months, I was already living in Boaz full-time. I still worked for Stan, but I had to join the morning caravan to Huntsville. Like thousands of ants, residents of the rural areas south of Huntsville migrate north every morning. Not to lose hope, thousands of the same ants flocked from the hills of Tennessee at the same time. Jobs and employment in Huntsville were booming, and people were willing to drive for the big paychecks. Cars would head north in the morning and return in the evening. Life was good. I was no longer married. Susie was active in the craft community and kept a schedule of all the craft shows and fairs in the county. At least once a month, she attended an event to sell her critters. With a little encouragement, she also started selling online. The only problem was that the shipping costs were so high that it limited sales. Many times I heard her quietly cursing Amazon. She just couldn't understand how they could deliver items for next to nothing, and it was costing her money. I didn't usually go with Susie to the sales. By then I had accumulated quite a collection of bark carvings. I gave a few pieces to Stan and Barbara, but kept most of them for myself. I never considered them good enough to sell. Susie asked if she could take a few to her next show, and I agreed. When she returned from her last exhibit, I already had dinner ready. How did it go? Very well. I sold 28 works. I'll have to work to restock for the next exhibition. She held out her hand and handed me a handful of bills. What's this? I counted out over $500. I sold your fairy houses, and I have orders for others. Wow, I didn't expect that. I was hoping you'd sell a couple, but no way did I expect you to sell them all. The good thing is that I sold them. The bad thing is that I sold them too cheap. How did you know that? I found out that one of the guys who bought a couple of them also had a booth at the show. I sold them to him for $60, and he took them back to his place and resold them for $100. I felt like a fool. I didn't know they were worth that much. Neither did I. I don't know whether to be upset or flattered. Either way, don't feel bad. You did good. Next time I'll price them right and take more with me. Chili smells good. I'd better order more bark. The problem arose in late October. Susie was working in the hole, and I was farther up the hill trying to figure out how to haul a log of dead cedar to the house. The cedar wood would come in handy for carving bird cozies. I heard him before I saw him. "You're a hard man to find, Mr. Langford." He seemed to be breathing hard, as if he was having trouble climbing the slope. The extra weight and beer belly, I'm sure, didn't help. But what really caught my eye was the large revolver in his right hand. "What can I do for you?" I racked my brain, trying to figure out who he was. He looked familiar, but I couldn't locate him. "You've already done too much. I spent years trying to find you, you son of a bitch. I lost my job, my wife, and my life, all because of you." Suddenly I remembered. It was Malcolm Hurd, my wife's ex-lover. I was embarrassed by the fact that I had actually had nothing to do with his death. I was just a bystander. His wife had organized and executed the whole thing. I was trying to think of a way to explain it to him when I heard a loud bang and saw him drop the gun and slowly fall on his side. Susie was standing behind him holding a shovel. She looked at me, shook her head and said, "Ouch." We both crouched down on an old poplar log by the path. After waiting a few minutes, we both began to worry. "How hard did you hit him? He should be recovering by now." Susie just looked at me and shrugged. It was a little awkward sitting like that. After a few more minutes, I stood up, leaned over, and put my hand on his neck. There was no pulse. I sat down on the log again. "What the hell do we do now?" Her tone was more curious than concerned. "I guess we could call the sheriff and claim self-defense, but that could end up in trouble." A little more time passed while we pondered. "We could just bury him with Dave and pretend nothing happened." I was amazed at how calm Susie was acting under the circumstances. "I know this is a strange question, but did you keep Dave's wallet and personal belongings before you buried him?" "Yes, his wallet, watch, and wedding ring stayed at my house." "Why?" "Did any of the neighbors know Dave or spend much time with him?" "No, not at all. Dave kept to himself. We didn't even go to visit anyone. We never went to parties or anything like that." "Was he anything like Mr. Hurd? I mean, was he close enough to Dave that he could pass himself off as him?" "Same age, weight, and build. Dave wore glasses. I have them in my house along with some other things. What are you thinking of doing?" "I'm not sure it will work, but I was thinking that if we can get a death certificate for this body, we can pass him off as your husband and get you out of the TVA pension fraud situation." "Isn't that too risky? What if someone recognizes him?" For a few more moments, we sat in silence. "I'm going to go get Dave's stuff from the house. I'll be right back." While Susie was gone, I looked around the area. The terrain was a little rough and rocky. There was some wrinkled skin and a small amount of blood on the back of my head. I moved the body slightly towards a medium-sized rock and smeared as much blood on it as I could. There wasn't a lot of blood, but enough to realize that there was a wound on the head. It looked like an accidental fall. I took off his wallet, watch, cell phone, car keys, and wedding ring. With his glasses, Dave looked good enough to pass muster. The DMV photos aren't really that good. Susie called 911. The paramedics determined that he was indeed dead. They called the local funeral home and the sheriff's department. They arrived within 20 minutes, and in another 10 minutes, Mr. Malcolm Hurd was on his way to be cremated, and Susie Doyle received her late husband's death certificate. That evening, Susie followed me as I drove Malcolm's car back to Birmingham. I left it unlocked outside the Kit Kat Club and put his wallet and phone on the front seat. 2 days later, the funeral home issued David Doyle's death certificate. After a quick trip to TVA headquarters in Chattanooga, Susie was able to stop the pension and also get a life insurance payout of $100,000. We celebrated that evening at the Red Lobster restaurant. I was amazed at how smoothly everything went. The ambulance people were efficient and knew what they were doing. The sheriff's department representative was pleased with the way they pronounced the death and didn't feel it was necessary to bring in a medical examiner. The funeral directors just wanted to take the body. Nobody even looked at the driver's license. I stayed in the background the whole time and let Susie handle everything. She was doing a good job. Since Susie no longer had Dave's retirement money, she had to find another way to generate extra income. She decided the easiest way to do that was to marry me. I couldn't say no. She still had that damn shovel,